The famous rifleman Chuck Connors died in 1992, but he left behind more than just a TV show. He had a life as exciting as any Western, with scandalous affairs that almost ended his career and a secret role in Cold War negotiations. After 30 years, the truth finally comes out. How a baseball player from Brooklyn became a hero in the Soviet Union, and why all three of his marriages ended in scandal, and the terrible secret he kept until the end. In 1921, Kevin Joseph Aloysius Connors was born in Brooklyn, New York. He would go on to become Chuck Connors. Their names were Alan and Marcella Connors, and they were Irish refugees. During the Great Depression, they worked hard to support their family. His dad was a longshoreman, and his mom did odd jobs to make ends meet. Life wasn't always easy, but Chuck learned how important it is to work hard. Chuck lived in a working-class area and played sports at the Bay Ridge Boys Club a lot as a kid. He really liked baseball and hoped to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers one day. Chuck's life changed a lot when he was 14. Smart people noticed how good he was at sports and offered him a scholarship to go to Adelphi Academy to play sports, a New York City private high school. He seized this big chance, and he did well with it. He did very well in many sports at Adelphi, including baseball, basketball, football, and even track. As a baseball player, Chuck was great at first base. In 1939, he was named one of the best high school players in Brooklyn. Chuck had more than 25 colleges give him athletic scholarships after he graduated from high school. The college he picked was Seton Hall in New Jersey, and he played baseball and basketball there. He was a backup center for the basketball team and helped them win with his height and defense. But baseball was where he really stood out. In a fun game in 1942, Chuck hit 2 home runs and drove in 6 runs. Professional scouts are interested in him. During this time, Chuck got the name that people know him by. During games, he would yell, "Chuck it to me," and the name stuck. World War II cut Chuck off from college. In 1942, he joined the Army and trained at Fort Knox. He was picked to be a tank warfare instructor because he was tall and good at sports. After that, he taught soldiers at West Point and even famous football players who went on to win national titles. Chuck kept up with sports even though he was in the service. He played baseball like a professional in Brooklyn in his spare time, and even hoops like a professional in the American Hoops League. Chuck was honorably released from the Army in 1946 after 3 years of service. He joined the Boston Celtics during their very first season in 1946 after getting out of the Army. He played forward and center and was 6 feet 5 inches tall. During that season, Connors played in 49 games and scored an average of 4.5 points per game. On December 13th, 1946, he had his best game. He scored 15 points and helped the team beat the Providence Steamrollers in a close game. He played basketball for a while, but not for long. After only a few months with the Celtics, Connors quit in February 1947 to follow another dream, playing baseball. His big break came on May 1st, 1949, when he joined the Brooklyn Dodgers. Things didn't go well at first, though. Connors hit into a double play in his only game with the Dodgers, which meant they lost. He didn't give up. Instead, he worked hard in the lower leagues and played for teams like the Montreal Royals. He got back to the big leagues in 1951 with the Chicago Cubs, and he had some big games during that 66-game season. He hit his first home run against the New York Giants on July 18, 1951. After a month, on August 26th, he hit another one against the Giants. He had 48 hits and a batting average of .239 by the end of the season. That's pretty good for someone who played 2 sports at the same time. In a very strange way, Chuck Connors' journey to Hollywood started. As a baseball player, he played for the minor league Los Angeles Angels in 1952. During a game against the Sacramento Solons on a sunny afternoon, something strange took place. Chuck hit a huge home run. It wasn't just any home run. It went over the fence and caught the eye of Billy Gordon, a casting director from MGM, who was in the crowd. Billy couldn't look away from Chuck's big, strong body and rough face. He went straight into the changing room after the game and gave Chuck his card. He told him, "You should picture yourself in stage." Chuck didn't think much of it, though. He was interested in sports and didn't think of himself as an actor. Then, after only 2 weeks, Chuck hurt himself while playing. Even though it wasn't important, it gave him time to think. He was interested, so he went to MGM to find out what all the fuss was about. He was shocked when they gave him a screen test right away. They liked what they saw after he tried it. After only 3 days, Chuck signed his first Hollywood deal. His life would never be the same after that quick choice. It was in the romantic comedy Pat and Mike, which starred Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, that he got his first part. Chuck had a small part. He was just starting to act, but even though he was a police captain, it was a big deal. On the first day of shooting, Chuck was both excited and scared. He got there early and got ready for hours. Though his part didn't happen until late that night, he did a great job with it in just 2 takes. Spencer Tracy even went up to him afterward and told him, "You've got something. Stick with it." Those words meant a lot to Chuck and gave him the strength to keep going. After that, Chuck jumped right into performing. He played every part he could find, no matter how big or small. He was in more than 20 movies between 1952 and 1958. In Disney's 1957 movie Old Yeller, he played Baron Sanderson, which was one of his most famous early parts. A lot of people love the movie, which made Chuck even more well-known. He was also in movies with John Wayne, like Trouble Along the Way, and with Gregory Peck and Charlton Heston in The Big Country. He became a better actor and became better known with each part. Along with his job in movies, Connors was in a lot of TV shows during this time, appearing in 18 different shows. Back then, it wasn't usual for actors to work in both movies and TV shows at the same time, but Connors' hard work and ability to adapt to different styles helped him do well in both. He worked hard for 6 years, played many different roles, and was on screen for over 1,400 minutes. This helped him get ready for the next part of his job. As Lucas McCain in The Rifleman, Chuck Connors became well-known, but it didn't happen right away. He played a dad in Disney's Old Yeller in 1957. The people who make The Rifleman saw him act and thought he would be great for their show. He first said no because the pay wasn't as good as what he was getting for other acting jobs. But the show's makers really wanted him, so they gave him more money and even a 5% stake in the business. That made him decide to play the part. As soon as Connors was cast, he began training to get ready. He got better at riding horses and learned how to spin and shoot a gun in a way that looked cool on camera. He worked with Rod Redwing, who knew a lot about guns. To learn how to do it, Connors worked out his hands so much that they hurt and got blisters. He didn't give up until it was perfect. People loved the show right away when it first aired on September 30th, 1958. The first show was seen by more than 14 million people. Lucas McCain, played by Connors, was tough but also kind, especially to his son Mark. Johnny Crawford played the part. One of the best things about the show was seeing the father and son close. Some people thought Connors did a great job of showing both feeling and strength. A big deal was also the gun in the show. It wasn't just a normal gun. It was a Winchester 1892 that had been changed in some way to make it stand out. The switch was made extra big so that Connors could spin it in a cool way to fire the gun. It became his signature move and was shown at the beginning of every show. The gun could also shoot very quickly thanks to a unique screw in the trigger. This made for exciting scenes where McCain could quickly beat a group of bad guys with his guns. Because the gun was so famous, Winchester made a real-life version of it for fans. But there was more to the show than just war. So what was different about The Rifleman? It was all about family. Lucas McCain was a dad in the Old West who had lost his wife and was raising his son by himself. At that time, most TV homes showed both parents, which wasn't the case here. The show talked a lot about how hard it was for Lucas to be a father and a guardian. In one episode, he had a hard time letting Mark testify in court because he was afraid for the safety of his son. In another, Lucas had to keep his temper in check while showing Mark how to handle his feelings. A lot of people who watched felt like the connection between Lucas and Mark was real. Single fathers wrote Connors a lot of letters, thanks him for showing them they weren't the only ones going through hard times. Someone who had lost their wife wrote, "Your show has given me the strength to keep going." He was more than just the star of The Rifleman. He was also very important behind the scenes. He started talking with the writers during the second season. He pitched story ideas, and some of them were used in shows that people really liked. One of them, The Photographer, was based on a time when Connors had to deal with a fan who was too excited during his baseball career. Connors also made sure that Lucas McCain's lines fit with who he was. It was his goal for McCain to sound like a real cowboy from that time. He often rewrote lines to include words from the past. Connors also worked hard to make McCain a figure that readers could relate to. He didn't want McCain to look like a perfect hero. That is why he pushed for stories that showed McCain's flaws and moral problems. McCain kills an innocent guy by accident in one episode of Waste because he thought it was important to show how dangerous it is to carry a gun. Connors also brought in guest stars like Duke Snyder, who used to play baseball with him and helped up-and-coming players get their start like Dennis Hopper, who was in the pilot episode. By the end of the show's run, Connors had such a big impact that some shows gave him credit as a story consultant. He went so far as to co-write the two-part series ending. It made sure to wrap up loose ends and bring back old personalities. With so much competition, The Rifleman was able to become the fourth most popular TV show in its first season. It first aired on September 30th, 1958, and had a Nielsen rating of 33.1, which means it was seen in 14.6 million homes. A lot of people watched because of the father-son relationship, and others watched because of the exciting action scenes. By February 1959, 78% of viewers said they watched the show to bond with their families, and 92% of male viewers aged 18 to 49 said they liked the story. Because the show was so popular, toys like toy rifles, lunchboxes, and comic books were made, and within 3 months of its first airing, they sold 2 million copies. It was also nominated for 3 Emmys in its first season, and it stayed famous for 5 years, ranking 27th in its last season. Fans still watch reruns of The Rifleman after all these years. A 2018 MeTV poll showed that fans aged 55 and up still liked it a lot. From 1963 until the end of The Rifleman, Chuck Connors had a big problem to solve. People knew him as Lucas McCain, which made him popular but also stuck him in the role of a Western hero. There were 168 episodes in 5 seasons, and fans couldn't tell the difference between Connors and the character. This kind of stereotyping became a trouble. Connors turned down many offers to do more Westerns because he wanted to show that he could play other parts. In fact, he turned down 8 Western TV shows in the 2 years following The Rifleman. He thought this would lead to more opportunities, but it made his work go more slowly for a while. He tried something very different in the 1964 movie Move Over, Darling, to get away from his image as a cowboy. Along with Doris Day and James Garner, he played a stiff, serious banker. It was very different from his rough frontier parts, but the movie didn't do him much good. He was still seen as Lucas McCain by producers and casting directors. And even when he auditioned for non-Western parts, they often said he seemed too Western. I was so angry with Connors by 1965 that I thought about stopping acting and going back to professional sports. Despite these struggles, Connors found new chances in 2 TV shows that let him show different sides of his acting talent. In Arrest and Trial, 1963 to 1964, Connors played John Egan, a defense attorney. The show was ahead of its time because it split each 90-minute episode into 2 parts: the detective's investigation and Connors' role as the lawyer in court. By putting on a suit instead of cowboy gear, Connors showed that he could play a smart and well-dressed figure. His acting was praised by critics. But after only 1 season, the show was canceled. In 1965, Connors and Brandon went back to a Western, but this time the story was different. He played Jason McCord, a cavalry officer who was wrongly accused of being a coward and was kicked out of the army. The show was mostly about McCord's quest to clear his name and get his reputation back. It had 48 episodes over 2 seasons, and let Connors play a figure with more depth and emotion than the simple heroes he had played before. When Connors played Tom Moore in the groundbreaking movie Roots in 1977, it was the most powerful role he had ever played. From slavery to the present day, the show followed the life of an African-American family. Connors played a mean farm owner, which was very different from his real life. His scary acting showed how horrible slavery really was without becoming too much of a caricature. A huge number of people watched the last episode of the show, which was a huge hit. Connors was nominated for an Emmy for his part, which is a rare honor that showed how well he could play difficult or controversial roles. Connors did minor roles in B-movies and TV shows near the end of his career. One of his most famous parts was in the scary movie Tourist Trap, 1979. He played Mr. Slauson, the creepy owner of a museum full of scary dolls. The movie didn't do well at first, but it became a cult favorite over time. Connors also took on unusual roles, like battling aliens in the low-budget sci-fi movie The Daytime Ended, 1980. On TV, he made appearances in famous shows like Fantasy Island, The Love Boat, and Murder, She Wrote. In the horror action series Werewolf, 1987 to 1988, he played the villain, Jano Skorzeny, showing a darker side of his playing. Chuck Connors' personal life was full of love, heartbreak, and drama. much like the roles he played on screen. Lizzie Jane Riddell, also known as Betty, was his first wife, a model from Canada's Montreal. When Chuck played baseball for the Montreal Royals in 1948, they met at one of his games. Betty's family was very rich, and they fell in love very quickly. On October 1st, 1948, they got married. Chuck was only 27 years old and still working out what he wanted to do with his life. They had 4 sons: Michael, Jeffrey, Stephen, and Kevin. At first, everything looked great, but things started to go wrong when Chuck's playing career took off, especially after he got the role of the Rifleman in 1958. He worked and filmed for long amounts of time, and rumors started to spread that he was cheating on his wife. Behind the scenes, things were getting worse between them. In 1961, Betty found out that he was seeing an actress on one of his film sets. That was the last straw for her. They got divorced in 1962 after she filed for it. Even though they were nice to each other in public, it turned out that Betty had threatened to tell everyone about his affairs if Chuck didn't agree to her terms for the divorce. Chuck's second marriage was to Kamala Devi, an actress he met on the set of Geronimo. They got married in 1963. Kamala was born in India, in Mumbai. Their marriage stood out in Hollywood at a time when relationships between people of different races were still uncommon, because she was part Indian and part British. A lot of shows and movies like Brandon and Cowboy in Africa had them together, and fans love how close they were on and off screen. They had some rough times together, though. But Chuck didn't want to try more complex parts because he thought his tough cowboy image was what made him popular. Their different goals made things tense. There were also problems in the marriage because Chuck was known for cheating on his wife. Even though they were very passionate at first, things began to go wrong. And after 9 years together, they split up in 1972. Their last movie together was called The Proud and the Damned. It made me think of how sad their relationship was at the time, and maybe the most divisive. In 1973, she had a small part in the movie Soylent Green, which is where he met Faith Quabius. Faith was 33 years younger than Chuck, which is a big difference. In a small wedding in Mexico on September 7th, 1977, they said "I do." At that time, Chuck, who was 56 years old, joking that they were acting like husband and wife on stage so much that they decided to do it for real. But they were married for only 3 years. In 1980, they got a divorce. Later, Faith said that Chuck was rude to her during their marriage and said that he did it because he was drunk. Even though Chuck denied the reports, they did damage to his reputation. Connors was the subject of stories about affairs and bad relationships throughout his life. Words of cheating started to spread during his first marriage. They never left him. One woman said she had an affair with Connors for a long time in the 1960s and that he fathered her child, but this was never proven. It became well known on set that Connors liked to flirt. As Joan Crawford once said, he could make birds fly from the trees, but he couldn't keep a relationship going. Some actresses wouldn't work with him because of his image, which hurt his chances of getting jobs. A famous event that happened in 1975 involved Connors being caught in a sexual act at a party with a young actor. The scandal was kept quiet, but he was said to have lost a big movie role because of it. His ex-wife's children said that his way of life made things hard for their family. After the fact, Jeffrey Connors said that his dad was always looking for thrills, which made everyone around him unhappy. Even though there were problems, Connors rarely talked about the stories. Just before he died, he thought, "I've lived my life on my own terms. Some people might not like it, but I don't feel bad about it." Chuck Connors stood out in Hollywood because of how strongly he felt about politics. In 1967, most Hollywood stars were against the Vietnam War, but Chuck marched in New York City in support of the war. A lot of people liked him, but some didn't. It wasn't all that Chuck talked about. He did a lot to help them out. During the 1964 race for president, he worked with Republican candidates, especially Barry Goldwater. Chuck didn't care that this hurt his job. In the past, he said, "I'd rather lose my job than lie." People even asked him to run for Congress in 1972, but he chose to keep playing instead. A lot of people had disagreements about the Vietnam War, but Chuck stuck to his beliefs. He didn't agree with the protesters and backed the war. In 1967, he marched with other people to support U.S. troops. He said, "We don't need to fight communism here, because we're already fighting it over there." A lot of people in Hollywood didn't like this, and he even got into fights with co-stars over it. He got very angry with Charlton Heston about the war while they were making Soylent Green. Chuck did more than talk. Between 1968 and 1972, He went to Vietnam many times to show his support. Chuck was upset about how badly the soldiers were treated after the war. He said that they should have had parades instead of protests and that the country had let them down. How much the Soviet Union loved Chuck's show, The Rifleman, was one of the most amazing things about his life. When things between the US and the USSR were bad in the 1960s and 1970s, The Rifleman was one of the few American shows that could be shown on Soviet TV. Fans loved his character, Lucas McCain, because he was a good dad and stood up for what was right. The show was seen by about 250 million Soviets by 1973. Even the boss of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev, was a big fan. While Brezhnev was in Washington, D.C., he asked to meet Chuck Connors in 1973. This meeting turned into a great thing. In the fall of that year, Brezhnev asked Chuck to come to Moscow. There was a lot of attention on Chuck for 2 weeks. He met Brezhnev at the Kremlin, and the two of them played with guns that Chuck had given him earlier. The Rifleman was also shown at a special event for Chuck, where people were dying to get his autograph. Chuck made a short called Peace and Friendship on this trip. It was shown to millions of people in the Soviet Union on TV. In the documentary, Chuck met regular Soviet people and talked about how the US and the USSR could get along. Connors had one last important job a year before he died. Kenny Rogers featured in a TV movie with him on November 3, 1991. It was called The Gambler Returns, The Luck of the Draw. It was a short scene, but Connors played his most famous role, Lucas McCain from The Rifleman. He wore a classic outfit by McCain and held the famous Winchester gun. McCain invites the gambler to a shooting match in this scene. The short scene made me think of Connors' favorite part, even though it was only 90 seconds long. Fans were very happy to see him play McCain one last time. It was an even more exciting moment because Johnny Crawford, who played his son Mark in The Rifleman, was also in the movie. Their short but touching scene together made people who have loved them for a long time very happy. The movie did well at the box office and was a great way for Connor to leave his most famous part. He was told he had lung cancer when he was 71 years old. It's likely because he smoked a lot. Every day, he could smoke up to 3 packs. Fans were shocked because they had always thought Connors was healthy and strong. At first, he didn't tell many people he was sick and kept going out in public. But by October 1992, he was much worse. He was taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles on October 28th because he had asthma, which made things even worse. He stayed there for 13 days while doctors did everything they could to help him get better. Connors died on November 10th, 1992, which was very sad. Lung cancer killed them, and asthma was a big part of that. A lot of people were sad when he died. Fans, co-stars, and athletes who knew and loved him paid respect to him. Connors made a strong mark on the world. His show, The Rifleman, is still loved by fans and is still shown on TV. It influenced how single dads were shown on TV and gave other Westerns ideas. It was also Connors who made history in sports. Only 13 people have played in both Major League Baseball, MLB, and the National Basketball Association, NBA. In 1946, while playing for the Boston Celtics, he broke a backboard during a game, making history. This took place during warm-ups before the Celtics' first home game. Connor had a short baseball career, but he made a difference in other ways. In 1966, he helped the Los Angeles Dodgers and 2 pitchers, Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale, work out a new deal. This was a big event that made baseball players stronger.